And I came here and I knew that, that it is a racialized country. I knew that I wasn't naive. Um, but I came here because I knew that I could have a better life. I knew that I could accomplish my dreams and my hopes and not be limited by, where I come from or who I am. Coming to America for me was really an opportunity to not only get an education that was, international, top-notch, quality education, but it was also an opportunity for me to sort of discover myself outside of my family and outside of the world that I know and being able to sort of see what the world is like. I had this notion of, that, I knew the history, I knew the civil rights movement history even before I came here. I mean, I knew that, being black meant that folks perceived you as being less than. But I also saw, phenomenal people. I mean, I remember when I was growing up in Nigeria, Andrew Young, who had been the mayor of Atlanta, I believe, had become the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, if I remember that correctly. And to sort of see this African man, this African American man, in that position of authority and that position of power. So I knew that there were the opportunities there, and that it was a place where, even though there's a history of racial oppression and indifference and injustice, that there is also that movement towards equity and equality. All is not as equal as it seems. And so I couldn't work from this place of, naivete. I couldn't be ignorant about racial politics. But what it also gave me was this drive to sort of think of who I am and where I come from, and I'm of value. And if they don't see that or they can't see that, that's their ignorance and that's their limitation, not mine. And I would work through it. And so it just gave me more, made me more determined, and I became more diligent. I appreciate those opportunities because what they did was that it made me put my history in context. It made me understand, where I come from and what my values are, and that those values are appropriate and I can apply them here in a different cultural context. But it also made me realize what the limitations of where I come from are. So I could see that and I could then work with that. Coming to America for me was really that dream that everybody has, right? But I also realized in the experience in that dream that it had its shortcomings. But having said that, I have been able to accomplish what I have because the opportunities were there. I was lucky that I had some great mentors, people who saw in me a potential all across the way and said, we're going to invest in you and we're going to provide you pathways to success. And we know you will work hard at making sure that you accomplish those goals and that potential. I come from a culture where children are a way of magnifying and extending the graces of God. I mean, that's just how I was raised. That, you are present to another individual and you give that individual life and you provide them with a context for living their life. The image that I had is that I could either not have a kid or that I could have a kid, but that I would have to get married to have the kid. And I wasn't willing to do that because I really didn't want to put anybody through the whole idea of being married and then, not being fully invested in a relationship. And it was a point in time where there had been sort of this movement, where they call it the gay boom, which is like all these gay guys were beginning to get together and wanted to have children and were adopting or surrogacy or whatever. And I just was very clear in my head that there was there were a lot of children in the world, a lot of black children in the world, in Africa and other parts of the world who needed a home, and that if I were going to be a parent, it would be through adoption. I didn't even think about surrogacy for a moment. I mean, I couldn't afford it. I was a faculty member. I wasn't making that much money. But I knew that I wanted to have a child, and I knew that if I were going to have one, I would look at these people's example and do it through adopted through fostering. And going through that process was also another moment of understanding, sort of being the other. Because going through the adoption process, it's predominantly women. And it's predominantly women at a particular point in their lives. Or couples who've dealt with infertility, or it's women who, really, like I was feeling, wanted to be a parent, and they were looking at either doing it through adoption. So I sort of went through the processes. I was in a relationship and I had a partner who was younger and who just was like, I'm not ready to be a parent right now. I can be an uncle, but if you want to adopt, you could do it on your own. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I just finished my doctorate, and I wanted to. I'm a project-based person, so I was like, okay, what's the next thing to do? Now, I've gotten the job. At the point I was department chair. I'd gotten my doctorate. Everything was kind of settled up, and I was like, you know what? I think I want to try being a parent. And so when Michael came, my goal was to sort of give him a sense of himself in the world, like I grew up with. Being black or being African was not a negative thing. I mean, I grew up at in a time in Africa, that African countries had just gotten independence, and we were the future. My parents' generation and my generation was the first generation of folks who were actually born in free Africa, and so for me it was just this whole sense of potential and opportunity, and I want my son to have that. But I also want my son to understand that, the world might be kind to you and it might be unkind to you. And that in the body that you inhabit, a good chunk of the time it might be unkind to you. And that you have to fight for what you have, and you have to collaborate in a good sense, to get what you have. And you have to be very clear about your principles. And you have to be very clear about your integrity and your intelligence. Because sometimes the assumption is that you may not have those things. I strongly believe that it's immigration that makes this country great. I mean, if you think about what people have to go through to get here, I left my family, I left the culture, I left the home, I left the foods that I'm familiar with, and I made a choice to come to another place, which for seek a better life, a safer life. And along the way, there are things that I denied myself so that I could get to that place. And so I don't think anybody who migrates with the intention of being a burden on another country or on another culture. They see themselves as being able to give, and they see themselves as being able to grow in another context. And I think that's really important, that folks understand that from the immigrant's perspective, we come here, I came here to have a better life and to help contribute to the success and the abundance of this country, because we love and we respect it. The common consensus in this country will not allow that the worst of the nightmares that one could have to happen. But I'm always reminded by certain family members that you really spend so much time. My adult life has been here. And I came here at 18, and so it's like my whole adult life has been in this country, and so I don't see myself living elsewhere. We are adding to the gross national product. That we're adding to the success of our communities. That we're adding to the civic and social discourse that happens in our communities, and in so doing, we're strengthening those communities. So I don't know, where people who are anti-immigrant see these stereotypes, but we're not it, I'm not it, and I think the more we get the word out about who we are, the more people better understand.